America. We were living in the east by the Nile River, living in luxury, enjoying freedom, justice, and equality. We wore silken robes and slippers of gold. We were the wealthiest and the wisest people, I'm told. Now we are the poorest of the poor. Nobody wants us at their door. So my friend, it's easy to tell, white man heaven is a black man hell.
Keep the call, y'all. It's easy to tell. White man heaven is a black man hell.
So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that Master Farad Muhammad said 6 words to us, and these were the 6 most powerful words that he spoke. He said, accept your own and be yourself. Accept your own. The Caucasians who brought our fathers into slavery desired to take us away from our own people, our own culture, our own religion, our own God, our own language. So we have grown up in America away from our own mind, away from our own selves, and so we have been actually indoctrinated with an alien mentality.
10,000 fearless men. Because we're going to have to challenge the things that are destroying our community. So this ain't no punk time. This ain't no temple time, mosque time, or church time. All the singing and shouting and preaching is over. Get in them streets now. Block by block. We're going to have to clean it up. The airwaves is not enough. The television screen is not enough. You got to put boots on the ground who are trained and are willing to make the sacrifice of life itself to see our community made a decent place to live.
Attention. Drill.
Soldiering is a part of the Nation of Islam, and it readies all of us to obey the commands of God. Now some will ask, well, why military drill? Because this is what produces the camaraderie.
Facebook and Instagram thought that they could ban the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
But in reality, they can't, because he already lives in us and millions of others.
قل أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين.
In the name of Allah, In the name of Allah, Master Fard Muhammad, the one true and living God, to whom praise is due forever, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is his messenger. Peace, family, and welcome back to another wonderful episode of WHID-FM. WHID-FM is your personal platform where those of us striving to follow the life-giving, life-saving teachings of the most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, as given to us by his premier pupil, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, gather right here in this virtual meeting place to answer that most critical question: what has Islam done for me? Tonight it is Sunday, May 24th, 2026. And at this time, we're going to turn it over to that dynamic co-host of WHID-FM. She's our sister, Janine Muhammad, who is a superstar student here in the ministry at Muhammad Mosque number 6, under the leadership of our beloved brother, student Imam Abdul Salam Muhammad. Sister Janine.
Assalamu alaikum, family, and thank you again for joining us for a wonderful episode of WHID-FM, where we hear the stories from our various guests about what Islam has done and continuing to do for them. I'm going to introduce our guest for tonight, who is Brother Randy Muhammad. He is a native of Boston, Massachusetts. He is a leader whose journey from a troubled past to a position of influence and service within the Nation of Islam and the broader community is both inspiring and transformative. Born and raised in the vibrant city of Boston, student minister Randy Muhammad has traveled a remarkable path. In 1989, he underwent a profound personal transformation, renouncing his past as a founding member of a local gang. His transformation gained public recognition in 1990 when he was featured in the Boston Herald, highlighting his extraordinary transition from gang involvement to becoming a devoted Muslim committed to positive change. He progressed through the ranks, beginning as a squad leader, later serving as a lieutenant and a drill instructor for the mighty FOI. As senior student minister, he oversees a dedicated team responsible for managing 10 ministries, each focused on serving the spiritual and social needs of the community. He established the first Nation of Islam chaplaincy within the Massachusetts Department of Correction, bringing hope and transformation to those seeking a new path. For over 30 years, he's been a consistent presence in county jails and state prisons, providing spiritual guidance, mentorship, and moral support to incarcerated individuals. Student Minister Randy Muhammad's life stands as a powerful testament to the transformative power of faith, resilience, and service. His leadership within the Nation of Islam and Torchlight Recovery Incorporated continues to inspire hope and positive change for individuals and communities alike. His journey affirms that through faith, determination, and a steadfast commitment to the betterment of society, transformation is not only possible, but also within reach. So we'd like to welcome him on the show tonight. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for coming on to share your story with others. I want to get started with my first question that I have before we go to our other guests. Now, transforming from a local gang is really what caught my eye, because a lot of times, a lot of our young men and women now are getting caught up in gangs. So can you tell us, for those who think that it's not possible, for you, what did it take? Was it hard for you, or was it something where it was kind of immediate with no backlash? Can you go into a little about that with us?
Yes, Sister Janine. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, who came to us in the person of Master Fard Muhammad. I bear witness that the most honorable Elijah Muhammad is the arisen Christ. And I further bear witness that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is the Messiah walking among us. In their names, I greet you and the listening audience with the greeting words of peace and paradise. Assalamu alaikum once again. So thank you for that question. I would say that for me, it was a process that began with listening to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. As I began to listen to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, the light went on in my head, and the self-accusing spirit awoken. And so the more that I began to listen to the minister, and I was never a person that liked to listen to ministers or go to church or was very religious at all. I was caught up in the streets as a young man. And but thank God for me back then, the hip hop culture, which I grew up in, was very conscious. And a lot of the artists back then, were promoting messages of consciousness. They were promoting Afrocentric themes, Islamic themes, promoting Black leaders. And so listening to Public Enemy, I got to hear Chuck talk about how Farrakhan's a prophet. And I think you ought to listen to what he can say to you, and him saying things like, I'm a follower of Farrakhan, don't tell me that you understand until you hear the man. And so Public Enemy came and kind of took hip hop by storm because they were fresh. It was unorthodox. They had the S1Ws on the stage with them. When you would see them, they were very militant. They were very conscious. So I was an MC back then. I was always in hip hop. I grew up in hip hop. I was a break dancer back in the days. I did my fair share of graffiti, art and writing, and I became a rapper, and I was a rapper at the time. So I would listen to the lyrics. And as I was studying Chuck D's lyrics, I knew that there was something different about Public Enemy, just their whole presentation, but I've never heard the name Farrakhan, and I didn't know who that was, but it was a curiosity because I kept hearing them name dropping. And so when we found a tape, my brother and I, my brother actually came home with a tape that he got from a friend of his of Minister Farrakhan, and we sat down and we listened to it. And again, I didn't even know he was a minister. We put the tape in, and it was the message that he delivered in Madison Square Garden in 1985, Power at Last. And we sat there, and I was just drawn to the message. And we listened to the whole message. The tape finished, we flipped the tape, put the other side. That's back when it was still cassette tapes. And we listened to the other side. And I remember being disappointed because it was only one tape and it wasn't the whole lecture, but I was drawn to the minister then. I was magnetized to his message, and it just put me on a journey to learn more about this man, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And the more I began to listen to him, and still doing my thing, still in the streets doing what we were doing, but I was listening to the minister. I found out that he was on a radio station every Sunday, so I would tune in and listen to the minister. And what I didn't realize was that the self-accusing spirit was awakening. And so I found myself judging myself and the things that we were doing. And I was no longer comfortable doing those things. And it was, one Sunday, I was listening to the radio and I heard that the minister was in town and he had come to Boston because his mother was living in Boston. And when she transitioned, he came to bury his mother. I didn't know all that at the time. I just knew that they said Minister Farrakhan was going to be at the mosque. So I made my way to the mosque. That was the first time I went to the mosque. And I seen the minister and heard the minister. And I accepted, didn't even think about it. And so for me, it was easy, I would say, because I started with the word and listening to the word. And once the self-accusing spirit was awakened in me, then naturally I lost the desire to drink, to get high, to want to be involved in criminal behavior. And I wanted to try to get right. I wanted to try to be myself. I wanted to be a righteous Muslim. And so it wasn't hard. It was my decision. And as far as my crew, being who I was and to the crew, it wasn't something that anyone really questioned or pushed back on. And that was just based on, my relationship and who I am and who I was with who we were, and so we can make a change. And so for our young brothers that are stuck out there in the street culture, know and understand that you can get out of that. You just got to change your mind, and you got to make up your mind. And there's nothing stronger than a made up mind. And once you make up your mind, and if you are really a G and you stand on principle, then you're going to stand on that principle. Don't let no one make you do something that goes against your nature and that which your conscience tells you. So I think it's a matter of not just being a follower, but you got to be strong enough to be a leader. See, a lot of times we're following, and we may follow someone into a gang. We're trying to impress somebody, and we're being led by peer pressure. Well, if you're being led by peer pressure and you're following somebody, then it may be difficult because you're seeking the approval of men rather than the approval of God. But I encourage you to be a leader. And if you're standing on business, once you know better, then you got to do better.
Yes, sir. All praise due to Allah. And I thank you for that, because I know, it's a lot about people that, really need to hear that there's a way out. And my next question before we go to Brother West, now you're in a period where you've heard the teachings and you want to be a part of the Nation of Islam. What helps you stay consistent? Because life is always going to still life. So what helps you stay consistent in this work and not fall off in your journey?
Yes, I think that as I reflect and think back, you got to stay inspired. You got to stay fired up. You got to stay studying. You got to accept and embrace the program wholeheartedly and never look back. And I think that for me, it was that. It was once I made up my mind, then I made up my mind and I was 100% in, and being carried by the Spirit. Like once you awaken that self-accusing spirit and you keep feeding on the word, you keep feeding on the knowledge, you keep feeding on the supreme wisdom, then the teachings are going to strengthen you and you're going to get stronger and stronger. And, it's the realization that in truth, there's nothing else out there for our people. And so I thank Almighty God Allah that, I was able to stay connected, stay rooted, stay consistent, and I would say to the young believers that are coming in, you got to accept this as your own. Take ownership for it. This is your nation. Don't look at it like you're just some passive person, like you're joining and this belongs to something else or someone else. You have to take ownership. This is my nation. And when you have that kind of mentality that this is your nation, and then you take responsibility, and by taking a responsibility, I mean taking on an assignment. Don't be afraid of the work. So I came in and they put me to work real quick. That's how I ended up doing prison ministry. Even as a young man, when I first came in, because of my background and knowing that I was street involved, by the grace of Allah, I did not have a criminal record. So I was recruited to go into the prison with the prison ministry, really just as a guest, just to go back and show others, right, that they can make it out and to speak to them. And so I started going back. So I took that on. I was recruited to be a squad leader. I didn't know nothing about being a squad leader. And I thank Allah for Brother Captain Jabbar, who was the minister's captain when he was in Boston. When he was the minister in Boston, he was around when I came in, and he took me under his wing, and he appointed me to be the squad leader, and then he made me a lieutenant. But when he asked me to be a lieutenant, I didn't know nothing about being a lieutenant. I was 18 years old. And he asked me, can you follow instructions? I said, yes, sir. He said, and you could be a lieutenant. And he guided me, and he poured into me, and he mentored me, but he gave me responsibility. And I accepted the responsibility. And when you accept the responsibility for this work, when you take responsibility to take a piece of this work, whether it's being a lieutenant, being a squad leader, being, a drill instructor, joining the ministry class, working out in the ministry, take a piece of this work and make it yours. And that kind of gives you that responsibility that ties you into the mission and doesn't allow you just to be a casual follower. We don't want to be just casual followers. We want to be the foremost. And so I think that, accepting the responsibility and taking on this work and taking on this mission, because the work and the mission actually gives you life. So as we sacrifice to do this work, we're sacrificing our time, our energy, but Allah is blessing us because he's developing us. He's growing us for positions that are awaiting us. So I think that, again, embracing the totality of the work is what keeps you inspired and keeps you consistent. If you begin to go back, if you begin to backslide, if you begin to second guess, if you think about the old life, if you slow up and you get scared, and it's going to happen. There was a time where, I got a little scared because I was so caught up and I was changing. And really, you got to go through that pain of the death of your old self. And when you realize that you're no longer the same person, it can frighten you a little bit, but don't look back. If you accept what God is making of you and stay in the process, then Allah will grow you and elevate you to be something that you could never had imagined. So I would say, as my Minister Don used to always tell us, stay the course. And I will say that to the younger ones coming into the nation, stay the course, lock in, accept the assignment, take ownership, and let Allah work through you.
Yes, sir. Praise be to Allah. Thank you for that. Thank you for answering that question. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Brother West, who has some questions for you that he wants to ask. So, Brother West, I'll turn it over to you.
Praise be to Allah. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Randy.
Wa alaikum salam, Brother West.
Yes, sir. So I know you spoke on becoming, I believe, a lieutenant in the ranks, and then, your overall evolution from being a brother, like you said, out there on the streets to now accepting the teachings. But I was curious how you became a student minister, how you got started with the ministry class, and then also what advice you have for others who may be interested in doing the same.
Yes, sir. It's about service. I was a lieutenant, and I actually was recruited. As I said, I was being recruited to go into the ministry and really to go into the prisons to speak, but I was still a lieutenant. And so what happened, there was a chaplain position that one of the brothers here in Boston was able to work because the prison program was very strong. So my brother Rodney, he was working out in the prisons. He actually recruited me to go into the prisons with him. And he had established a chaplaincy because for many years, the brothers were going into the prisons and they were volunteering. But because of the great work that he was doing in the prison, the men in the prison, they wanted him to be there full time. They wanted him to not just come on once a week, because they realized that they had a Catholic chaplain in the prison that was on payroll, and they had a Protestant chaplain. They had a few chaplains. So the brothers, they began to advocate so that the brothers could have their own chaplain, the Nation of Islam chaplain. And the brother became the first chaplain for the Nation of Islam in the county prisons. And, Boston was very racist, was even more racist back then. And it was the good old boy network. And they was not happy about the Nation of Islam having a chaplaincy in the prisons. So that led to a confrontation between some of the officers and our brother. And, he was banned from going into the prisons, but the position, the chaplaincy position, was there and it was vacant. And so they would announce at the mosque with the announcements in an FOI class that they needed someone to go and to serve in the prisons. And, no one stepped up, and it was asking for a while. And after several months, and this was a need, then I stepped up and I said, I'll go. And so that's how I went into the ministry. I started doing prison ministry. I was recruited into the ministry class, and my captain back then, he said, you got to make a choice. You can't be a lieutenant and a student minister at the time. I was doing both for a while, but he made me make a choice. And so I went into the ministry class, and that's where I began my ministry, is primarily doing prison ministry. And so as I did that for several years, many of the brothers that we ministered to in the county jail, unfortunately, some of them matriculated into the state prison, which is more time. County jails, you may get a year, 2 years, 2.5 years. Is relatively a small bid comparing when you're sent upstate to the state prison. That's for more serious offenses, attempted murder, and bigger sentences where men are sentenced for up to life. And so some of the brothers that we had met in the county had gone out of jail, picked up other cases, or might have even had open cases in the county and ended up upstate. And they were so used to our representation and inspired by us that they began to request us upstate. And so that happened, and we had to establish, and I was the one who had to go up and become and establish the first Nation of Islam chaplaincy in the state of Massachusetts, in the state prison. And so I was doing that and ministering there for many, many years, and also serving eventually as the assistant, as one of Minister Don's assistant ministers in the city. Just continued me on that journey of my ministry that led me to where I am right now. But it was based out of need, and this is why I was saying earlier, in order to be consistent in this work, you have to accept the challenge when the call is made, when positions make themselves available. There's plenty of work in the Nation of Islam, but you have to be willing to step up and accept the assignment and do the work, and have the faith that even though you may not feel that you're qualified or that you're ready, step out on faith and trust in the God, and let him work in you and work through you, and let him grow you, because he's here. He came to save us, and he came to make out of us a nation of gods. But we can't grow to that if we don't accept the assignment, if we don't step out on faith and accept our own and strive to be ourselves.
All praises due to Allah. I think those are some wonderful words of advice I feel like, honestly, any believer that, will want to become a laborer in general, not just a student minister. Then my next question, we go to Brother Jamal for his questions. I'm curious, with this new generation of, youth that are out there, it's a lot of different elements that weren't present,
Yes.
during the time that you got registered and everything. So what do you say to these young men to explain the benefits of joining something like the Nation of Islam in a time like today?
Yes, sir. Unfortunately, our people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. And I agree with you that times are different now. I spoke about earlier, in truth, it was hip hop that led me to the Nation of Islam. Because again, in that time, the artists were conscious, right? The bigger stars, the greater rapper, the ones that we looked to that was the most popular was the ones that had the greater teaching, that had the greater knowledge and the greater realism and activism. So we had rappers like KRS-One, and that his name literally is an acronym that stands for knowledge reigns supreme over nearly everyone. We had groups like Brand Nubian and Poor Righteous Teachers and Poor Public Enemy, and the brothers were wearing X hats and X t-shirts and red, black, and green. So the culture, the music was conscious, and so it was a little bit easier. Fast forward to now, what you're speaking about, the popular rappers that are being promoted are the rappers that are promoting a self-destructive genocidal culture where they drilling, the drill rap, where it's about killing, it's about promoting murder, it's about promoting gang banging, it's about promoting, drug dealing, and among our women, scamming and, stripper culture, right? Strip club. So there's a lot of more negative influences, and that is not accidental. That is by design, because those that owned the record labels understood and seen the impact of what the conscious rappers were doing, waking up the youth and guiding them to consciousness. And so they began to invest in gangster rap and thug rap, in music that degrades us, and so, we look at the biggest artists today, or the wealthiest artists in hip hop. We're talking about Jay-Z. He's a billionaire. We're talking about 50 Cent. I don't know if he's a billionaire yet, but we know he has all the shows on Star and making movies and all kind of deals. But when we study their trajectory and their growth, Jay-Z talked a lot about in his earlier music, the fact that he was a drug dealer and, how he sold crack. And a lot of his early music was really, in my humble opinion, glorifying or promoting the drug dealer culture. And so they got the record deals. 50 Cent came out with his first album, Get Rich or Die Trying. So the message to the young people is, and he came out again promoting the fact that he was a drug dealer and that he was a gangster. And so young people that watch this, our young people today in the communities, they want to be a billionaire. They want to be rich. They want to be like the rappers with the iced out chains and diamonds and gold and money and Bentleys. And so if the rapper's saying that I got this being a gangster, no wonder the young people want to be gangsters. So how do we get them? The way that we get them is we gotta show them that lifestyle is a facade, that lifestyle is fake, right? And so that's not real. And we're losing in that culture. They'll have a few of us that they put before us like the stars. But even if we look at the rappers, most of the drill rappers end up dying, getting killed, right? They end up back in jail. So you can see that criminal life has a very short shelf life. And so we have to be very astute and wise in educating our young people and let them know and see that this culture that is being promoted among our people is intentional to re-enslave us, and that they are they are making us a slave again. There was just a trial that happened in Florida where the young rapper Julio Fulio was murdered, and he allegedly was a drill rapper who was making music about the set that he represent and mocking, right, the murders of the other set. And so this type of energy brings that energy. So when he was hunted down and gunned down, what went viral is at the trial when the sentencing came, because those that were charged, there was, I think, 4 or 5, they were facing the death penalty. But the prosecutor made the case that they'd rather lock him up in jail because he was young and they could use him for sweat equity. And this is what they're doing with our young people that are out here caught up in this self-destructive culture and wanting to be a killer and a thug. That's the trick to get you back into the prisons, and the prisons are the new slave plantations. And so this is my message to young people. I served in the prisons. I didn't do time, but I did a bit. I did a good 30-year stretch. I was in the prison every day. I would tell the brothers, I'm doing time with you. I just get to go home. I got a furlough every night. I got to go home, but I got to come back in the morning. I say that jokingly, but in reality, I was in these prisons and I got to meet a lot of the brothers, good brothers that made bad mistakes when they were young, that they end up paying for. And when you spend time behind the walls and not with those that's trying to glorify it for clicks and likes, but when you really in there behind the wall, see what people that are trying to glorify this thug culture, they don't tell you about the reality in prison when you're suffering because you're not getting no visits, because your girlfriend left you, because a loved one dies and you can't even pay your respect. It's all fun and games the first year, 2 years, 3 years, but 5 years in, 6, 7 years, 10 years in, 15 years in, 20 years in, it's not funny no more. And so when you're in the state prison and you're around people that has done 15, 20, 30, 40 years, they understand it's not a game, it's not funny. And so we speak to those brothers and really have them to really start speaking to the young brothers in the street. But I convey to them the messages, right? That we're losing in this game. We're losing in this thug culture. You could commit a crime and then serve the rest of your life in prison or 10 to 15 years in prison. So I think we got to make that connection with the young people and let them know and understand, as the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, he put us on game back in the late 80s when he went on the Stop the Killing tour. And he was educating us that the government was using drugs, gangs, and guns as a pretext to come into our communities and kill us wholesale. He taught us that the government was responsible for bringing the drugs in to our communities. And they was responsible for bringing these high-powered weapons into our communities. So all of this was a setup to justify our mass incarceration. And so we have to teach our young people that history and that reality, and then give them other options. We don't have to kill each other. So I have a campaign that we do here. We call it the Know Your Smoke campaign. It actually came out of the prison, where we talk to the young people and we say, you have to know your smoke. And we use the terminology smoke when we started using that a few years back. That was the new verbiage for conflict and fight. I got smoke with these dudes. I got smoke with those dudes from another hood, from another set, from another gang. And we would educate them to know your smoke, meaning that the brother from the other hood is not your natural enemy. The brother from the other gang is not your natural enemy, but the real enemy is systemic oppression and racism, and those individuals that created ghettos in the first place, those that have been historically disenfranchising us. And so we educate them about their real smoke, and then we have to create, new systems where we can stop the conflict, enter into conflict mediation, start to bring unity among our people and teach us how we can make money in the not in the underground economy, but by establishing businesses in our community. We just got to show them a different way. Minister Don used to say, heaven and hell on the same street. They're just in opposite directions. So if you're going down the negative path, you're on the road, the same road that can take you to heaven. You just got to turn around. And so this is what we say to our young brothers that's in the street and sisters. Let's just turn it around. Keep your hustle. Keep your same energy. Keep your same warrior mentality, right? But use that for the right reason. Be a soldier in the Nation of Islam. You want to be a soldier? You a warrior? Join the ranks of the FOI. You a hustler? You will learn how to make money in a way that no one can come and take it from you. So we just got to educate our people and show them how to do what they're doing better. The enemy makes the drugs and the gangster culture attractive, but it's a trap.
All praises due to Allah. I appreciate your answer. I think you gave a great outlook on essentially bridging the gap between, I would say, the Nation of Islam and, you know, the streets. Is like the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, his best followers, they still out there. We got to go get them. So
that's right.
With that, we'll turn it over to Brother Jamal. He's going to take his turn asking you some questions as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Brother Wes. And in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Student Minister Randy Muhammad.
Wa alaikum salam, Brother Jamal.
Yes, sir. So I want to at first go more about your background and how you grew up in Boston. What were some of the biggest influence that shaped your life while growing up in Boston?
Well, you know, as a young person before I coming into the Nation of Islam, you know, I grew up in a household where there was 8 of us. You know, I have 7 brothers and sisters, and I happen to be the youngest one. And so my influence in my formative years came from my elder brothers and sisters, primarily my older brothers. You know, there was 8 of us, and my father and mother separated when I was around 8 years old. And so my older brothers were, you know, 10, 12, 14, 16. So they were teenagers, you know, and so I grew up with them, you know, and I grew up following them, and they didn't have much guidance. So we were struggling with deep poverty and straight poor. And so we went into the streets, and that's what led to getting involved with, you know, crime and stealing, and led to drug dealing and carrying guns and gangbanging, right? The streets were our influence. That was what was our influence. That's what led us in that path. And we knew one thing, that we were poor. And so I developed a mentality early that I'm a survivor, and that, you know, we're going to survive by hook or crook. We're going to make it. We have to do what we have to do. And so those circumstances led me to down the wrong path. I didn't have too many positive influences, you know, around me that were doing positive things, you know. And so again, I was heavy in the streets, grew up in the streets, but hip hop, I could say hip hop saved my life, and because it led me to the nation. And so the consciousness that we got, the knowledge that we got came from that and through that. And we were led to now listen to Minister Farrakhan and read Message to the Black Man and find out about Malcolm X and learn about Africa, you know. But that seed was planted, but there weren't that many examples, which is again why I ended up down the road. But once I came into the Nation of Islam, all praises are due to Allah, because we had, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and he became like a surrogate father to us. I would just listen to him, and he taught on everything, every subject, and then coming into the mosque, and it was a blessing. One thing I loved about, and I love about the Nation of Islam, especially coming from where I was coming from gang culture, street culture, right? What I love about the nation when I first came in was that the men were militant. They didn't have a soft, look about them at all. They didn't look like men, that you can play with. You know what I mean? They didn't look like what I was accustomed to seeing, what is represented in churches, which usually is mainly women led, women dominated in the church, and a lot of the men are not, real militant, strong, right? But when I went to the mosque, I saw the men. I saw the brothers on post, and I seen, strong men. And then coming into the ranks and being a part of the FOI, the military training of the men that belong to Islam, that was right up my alley, because I couldn't hang with the gang no more, but I had the fruit. I had my brothers, and we would go out soldiering, and we a brotherhood. We soldiered together, we trained together. So there's that camaraderie, there's that brotherhood, and in that brotherhood, I got to meet a lot of great brothers older than me that had life skills that can educate me on certain things, put me in the right direction. Many mentors, many different grown men, responsible men, some business owners, but examples of brothers, married men, brothers that were husbands, brothers that had wives, and brothers that were fathers, brothers that were working, brothers that were responsible, brothers that was taking care of business. So those became my role models. It was the elder, the brothers, the FOI in the ranks, So I thank Allah for the mighty FOI, and that was just in the city of Boston. But being in the Nation of Islam, we come together as a nation. So looking at the strength of the brotherhood in the ranks, and the brothers that I looked up to and respect in the city of Boston, and then when we come together with New York and Philly and Jersey and DC, and we go to Savior's Day in Chicago, and we're seeing what men look like. Those were the examples that, by the grace of Allah, had inspired me and helped me to become the man that I'm becoming now. I could not have become the man that I am now were it not for one, first and foremost, Almighty God, Allah, of course, his messenger, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, but the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who just listening to his voice and his wisdom on tapes and videos nursed me. But then those great brothers in the ranks of the FOI that were examples, living examples that I can see in real time. I could not be the man that I am without those examples of manhood. All praises are due to Allah.
Yes, sir. All praises is due to Allah. Is it very interesting how you said, I hear a lot of brothers at first when you started talking about it, I hear a lot of brothers say a lot of their introduction to the Nation of Islam is from rap music, how you explained it earlier, and hearing about how rappers talk about the minister a lot and how being followers of the minister. And I like how you said, when you was introduced to the gang culture, but then you was introduced to more of a familyhood when coming into the nation. So that, and I wanted to actually go on to that, what you talked about earlier was the death of your old self when Sister Janine was asking you questions. So the next question I wanted to ask was, was the hardest part, going from gang culture to the nation? what was the hardest part of about walking away from gang life and embracing Islam, or getting rid of some traits that you had in your gang life?
Yeah, so it is that, reality that the old self has to die. So the hardest part, and I remember vividly, I remember, because you get caught up with the word and you're so inspired, and so, and the self-accusing spirit was up. So I couldn't do what I was doing before. I knew that, especially when I came into the mosque and I took my letter out. Now I know. Now I'm learning. I'm in orientation. I'm learning more on how to be myself, and I couldn't be on the block. I couldn't be in the hood with the brothers. Not because I couldn't be, but it's just that, and that was the painful part for me. I remember it very vivid. I still have love for my brothers in the street, my crew, still my brothers, love them, but I just can't do what we were doing. And I remember before I came into the nation, but I had the minister in my head, and I would go among my crew, and then, they getting high, and I don't want to get high. And I start teaching, man, why are we doing this? So now I'm killing their high. Now I'm messing it up. I'm messing up their fun because I'm in the teachings and I'm trying to share the teachings, and they're not trying to hear the teachings for whatever reason. They weren't there at the time. You know what I mean? We're no longer compatible, right? So again, just realizing that I couldn't hang out with my homies no more. I couldn't go to the block again. And I want to reemphasize, not that I couldn't, because I could still go there now, but it's just not in me, right? It's not who I'm trying to be. And so that realization was a little difficult. And then coming from the mosque, you fired up on Sunday, but it's like, okay, now what? See, when you with the crew, we always together. There's, after work or after school or after whatever, right? We coming together, we going out, we hanging out all the time. And so when you come to the mosque, it's like, okay, we go to the meeting, but then after the meeting, then what? And I felt a little bit lonely at times, but what I did was I channeled that energy back into the work. So I remember coming home and feeling that feeling. Guess what I did? I took my final calls and went to the block and was out there on the block pushing the program. You know what I mean? And so I filled up the void that I was feeling from not being able to be with my friends and my crew, with soldiering even more. And then, as I became a squad leader and a lieutenant, it was almost like my squad was my crew in my mind, right? So we would do things together. We would go out and train together. I would set up where we as a squad, we're gonna go running, we're gonna go work out, or we're gonna go soldier together. So I would set up different scenarios where, as a squad, right, almost again as a crew, but in a righteous crew, we're still hanging out, but we're doing the work, and so I just learned how to rechannel that energy into the brotherhood, and it actually helped to build the brotherhood, right? Because that's what's needed. We need that brotherhood. We need that camaraderie, right? And so once I learned how to pivot and turn that energy there, and then, I got married at 21. All praises are due to Allah. So, my high school sweetheart, right? We got married because that was the example, in the Nation of Islam. We don't do boyfriend and girlfriends. We do husband and wife. And so as I got married at what many people thought was a young age, but then my energy and my time was between the nation and my family, my wife, and the house and work. So after a while, you don't have time to hang out. So that void was short-lived, but you got to grow into your new position, And so that was for me the difficult. So I would say to anyone that's coming in, there's going to be a transition point. There's going to be a point where you may get scared because you're changing and you're no longer the person that you was, and you may feel lonely, or it's going to feel a little bit different, but you got to stay the course, stay committed, and channel that energy into what we came to build a nation. So let's do that. We don't have time to waste. Let's put all the energy that we can into building the brotherhood, building the sisterhood, and building the nation of Islam.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. And how your answer was, that is, I can see the toll that probably took from you from growing up with brothers that was in the street and, filling that void with, not to say they're better than the brothers that was in the street, because they could come in these teachings and be also righteous brothers and righteous Muslims, but, working with other brothers that do the work that you do, like-minded people at the time. So yes, sir. I thank you for that answer. And actually we have a question from Brother Donald before we go to SID for Brother West. He says, after hearing that God is a man, how did he respond? How did you respond? And how can we share such knowledge and make it clear to others?
All praises due to Allah, Brother Donald. That's an awesome question. For me, I was caught up in the word and the teachings of and what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was giving us, right? Because he was sharing so much things that I've never heard before, and it all was making sense. Matter of fact, as I came into the nation, I felt kind of disappointed a little bit that I had not known and was introduced to this teaching sooner. It was like, where have the nation been around all this time and I'm just finding out about it, and so, but I was so caught up in the spirit and what the minister was giving us and the love of the brotherhood and the nation. When I heard that the black man is God, I accepted it because there was so much, everything that the minister had taught that I didn't know. And I researched. I was really on the outside studying for maybe about a year, just listening to the minister before I actually came to the mosque. I used to listen to him on Sunday. I never been to the mosque. When I'll see the brothers, I get a final call, So by the time I came into the mosque, I've been listening to the minister for a while. And a lot of that was really researching some of the stuff that he was teaching, right? Finding out about Islam, because I never even knew about Islam. So I started to read, well, what is Islam? I started to learn the history of Islam and Muslims. And, he talked against eating pork. And so I started studying, well, why don't we eat pork? And I read the book, How Not to Eat Pork. And I learned about the trichina worms. And I learned, how filthy the animal is. And I learned how the Bible condemns us eating pig in the book of Leviticus 11:7. And I learned how eating the pork is condemned in the Holy Quran, so it's divinely prohibited. So, he's teaching me things that I never knew, I never heard of. But as I researched it, I found that everything he was telling me was right and exact. So that my faith in trusting him and what he's saying grew. So understanding the reality of God, I accepted it, but I gotta be real. That was one of the ones that I didn't fully understand, and I wanted to understand. And I got to say that because when you coming from, believing in a mystery God and understanding the concept of God of this world, there literally has to be a paradigm shift in your understanding of God, because it's not what you've been taught, So there has to be the shift, and until you can actually have a paradigm shift in your mind and understanding the reality of God, you won't get it. But it was powerful to hear that, but to really understand it required deep study. And, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan did the lecture, Who is God? And he broke that down, but man, he did such a marvelous job. in making the teaching so plain. And I would recommend to anyone that may be struggling with understanding the reality of God, you have to read, Our Savior Has Arrived, where the messenger goes into breaking down the knowledge of God, the reality of God. You got to read, of course, Message to the Black Man. He starts off dealing with who is that mystery God. And so coming into the knowledge of the reality of God and our connection to God, that we are God's, again, that's what gives you the power to want to change if you accept that reality. You want to be God. So that's really what made me stop smoking and drinking and using drugs. I didn't want to defile my temple anymore. That's what made me walk away. That's when the self-accusing spirit has been awoken as to the reality that who I am. So now I got to carry myself as a God. And so, you say to yourself, man, a God wouldn't do that. A God wouldn't eat that, wouldn't do this, wouldn't smoke that, wouldn't drink this, right? So that's what gives us the power to really transform our lives and come in alignment with our nature. And that's what gives us power. So that was a powerful, powerful reality that came to us in the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, is understanding the reality of God and our connection to God. Because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that the knowledge of God is akin to the knowledge of self. And the knowledge of self is akin to the knowledge of God. So to know one is to know the other. And this is the study that we are embarked in, not just for the purpose of worshiping God. We worship God, but to emulate God, to be a God, to allow God in us to work in and through us for his will and purpose. All praises are due to Allah.
Yes, sir. That was an excellent response, man. You taught me something just now, to be akin to yourself and akin to God, and just focus on yourself and to learn about yourself, to say what a God would do and what a God should not do. That's an excellent response. And before we ask more questions, we're going to hand it over to Brother Wes, who's going to do our SID. Brother Wes.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And family, we just want to remind you that you are listening to WHID-FM. We thank you for tuning in and spending your valuable time, because without you, there is no WHID-FM. If you have any suggestions, you can send us an email at WHID1919@gmail.com. And also, please subscribe to WHID-FM on YouTube and follow us on Facebook. And next week, our guest will be, inshallah, Sister Monique from Muhammad Mosque number 24, and Sister Latifa will guest co-host next week. So make sure you return right back here next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we will be right back after these messages.
Everybody join in this melody. That's the only way we're gonna be free. Everybody singing this sweet refrain. Sing this melody till it gets in your brain. Well, I'm talking to you, Muslim, Christian, and the Hebrew. Here's the thing to do, we got to unite, or else we are through.
Assalamu alaikum. This is your brother LaRon Muhammad, the owner of Supreme Styles Collections, an online haberdashery where we sell accessories, books, body butters, prayer rugs, even supplements. So we have what a man needs spiritually, physically, and mentally. And with our help in making our brothers into a well-made man and presentable to the community and world, just like you put a bow on top of a gift, you can purchase one of my bow ties and pocket squares handmade by me. They are the right size with the 2 dimples, the 3-inch clip, and a 12-inch matching handkerchief. So come on and start a new collection and check out our selection at SupremeStylesCollections.com. That's the new website. And also follow us on Facebook at Supreme Styles Collections. Also follow me on Facebook and Instagram at LaRon Muhammad. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Praise be to Allah. And that's right, family. We encourage you to support Black independent education by purchasing a Supreme Bean Pod, because this world famous treat is not only delicious, but all proceeds are donated to MUI Chicago. So please help us change our condition one pot at a time by visiting thesupremebeanpod.com to either purchase a pod, or you can make a donation today if you're not a big fan of the Supreme Bean Pod. My next question for you, Brother Randy, as we begin to ask our final questions, I'm curious, I feel like everybody has their own interpretation of what it means to be a Muslim, even though there is that one definition, which is to submit yourself to do the will of Allah, but that can look differently for a lot of people. So when you first got registered and you became an FOI, did you have a personal interpretation of what it meant to be an FOI? And if so, how has that definition changed over time throughout your years of being registered?
Yes, sir. I think that we come in not knowing. The first lesson that we receive is called student enrollment. So the first step in being a student is recognizing that you don't know. And so we come in, the first lesson that we receive in the Nation of Islam is to write our letter, our Savior's letter, which requires observation, concentration, and submission. You got to observe this letter. You got to concentrate and focus, because you have to write it like the messenger wrote it. You got to dot your I's, cross your T's. And we're learning to write in a way that we've never written before. But the lesson is because you're learning, or you're coming to learn to live a lifestyle that you've never learned before. So we come in as students, and we come in humble, and we come in submitting. So, I didn't have any preconceived notion of what it meant to be a FOI, other than to be a Muslim, other than come in and submit and learn. And as we learned and you submit, one of the things that is not, you really don't think of initially, is the mission. Because we come in, we hear the knowledge, we're inspired by the word, we want to be ourselves, we want to be a Muslim, how do you be a Muslim? Well, you gotta believe, you gotta pray, you gotta fast. During Ramadan, you gotta give in charity, right? These are the pillars of Islam. So you learn the pillars and you're trying to be a good Muslim, but all those things are personal, things that you have to do. But, in coming to be an FOI, we're not just accepting a religion. Matter of fact, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said Islam is not a religion. It is a complete way of life. And so with that is the mission. and the mission of the resurrection of the dead, the mission of going out after our people and raising those that are still in the grave. We've come in to be helpers of the Messiah, helpers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and helpers of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, because the mission was given to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Now we have accepted to be his helpers. And now under the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who is his primary principal helper. So we coming in to be helpers in the cause of Islam. And so, you know, when you think of it on the surface, Islam, one who submits his will to do the will of God. But what is the will of God? Aside from praying and fasting and charity and pilgrimage, but the specific will of God today is the resurrection of the dead. What God, his will right now is that the black man and woman of America, who have been robbed of our name, language, culture, God, religion, history, and identity, who are at the bottom of civilization, God's specific will is that the black man be raised up. So if you want to be a good Muslim today, then you have to pray, you have to fast, you have to give in charity, you have to perform the pillars, you have to live the restrictive law of Islam. But equally important is that we are yoked to the work and to the mission, because if we're praying and fasting and living the law, then we're good Muslims. But if we're not engaged in the mission, then we're good for nothing. And nobody wants to be good for nothing. God came to raise us up, but not just us. And as we have been raised by the grace of God, but we've been called to this mission. And we can't forget the brother and the sister that's still out in the streets, that's dying for the lack of knowledge. So I think the evolution of my understanding of what it is to be a Muslim and an FOI is to be a servant of Almighty God by going after the people that he traveled 9,000 miles by himself to save. The people that he said he would climb a mountain 40 miles high and eat rattlesnakes just to teach one. So if we want to be a good Muslim, that's God's will. Let's get after his people.
Praise be to Allah. I think that's a wonderful understanding of it. You know, before I continue with my questions, we actually have a question from a guest in the chat, and they say, Assalamu alaikum. Please share some of your success stories. Please share some of your successes with the 10 ministries and tell us why this entity of Nation of Islam is so important. Thank you.
All praises due to Allah. That's an excellent question. You know, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, he gave to us the 9 ministries, which, you know, was an outgrowth or byproduct of the Million Man March and that whole movement. You know, in my assessment, the minister has given us a tool and a vehicle that if we enact what he has asked us to do, will help to place us in a vanguard position among our people and building a nation. And so, you know, one of the ministries that I really worked out in was the ministry of justice, coming from the position of being a chaplain at the time and working with incarcerated individuals that seemed like, you know, the ministry that I can serve and should serve. And so under the ministry of justice, we were blessed to be able to put on plenty of symposiums where we brought people together to look at mass incarceration, starting with, you know, Michelle Alexander, who wrote the book Slavery by Another Name, or excuse me, she wrote the book The New Jim Crow, Slavery by Another Name. And we were able to have these symposiums at BU and BC and different major auditoriums where we invited folks from diverse communities, because when we talk about, the criminal justice system, that system, it impacts all of us, right? And so our main objective was to educate the public to the unjust laws and laws that were being applied unjustly to Black people, and how that really affected all of us as a society, because states are spending millions and millions of dollars to incarcerate inmates, and they call them, the Department of Correction, but there wasn't a whole lot of real correction taking place. And from our perspective, that was a great mismanagement of the taxpayer funding, in prisons, especially when we look at the system of mass incarceration and how they were sending Black men to jail under these laws, these big sentences, these mandatory maximum sentences, the disparity in the crack sentencing versus powder cocaine, a ratio of 10-1, and so that was one of the things that I think we had a lot of success, because we were trying to affect change. One of the things that we did under the work of the 10,000 fearless peacemakers, we were going out into the streets, promoting peace and offering conflict mediation. And that work led me to a meeting where there was some community leaders, and we were discussing the violence. And there was some things said in that meeting that led me into the prison. And somebody in the meeting said that a lot of the violence that was taking place in the streets was being dictated to by those that were behind the wall, And so when I went behind the wall, I called a meeting of all the brothers that were in gangs and street involved, and we started to have a dialogue. And that's where the Know Your Smoke campaign really began. And so, part of I remember having a conversation, because I brought the brothers together, and I was, reaching out to them, because I was appealing to them, man, we got to change this self-destructive culture, because, the hip hop culture now has been hijacked, and they promoting this negative, this self-destructive culture. But you brothers that are incarcerated, the reality that is not glamorous, And so as we was talking about how do we change the culture, because we're losing, and you may be locked up, but your young ones are out there. You have children out there. You have cousins out there. You have nieces and nephews out there, and they getting sucked up into this culture. So I need you to raise your voice against that culture and let them know what's really going on. One of the brothers in the meeting said, well, why should we care? He was doing a natural life bid. He said, why should we care about what's going out there? What's that got to do with us? And again, I reiterated about our people, and we should care about our people. But we also developed a program. And I said, if we can educate the people in the street, the Black men in particular that have checked out of the process, and we begin to educate them into the political process, then maybe we can begin to change some of these unjust laws, right? And maybe we can begin to bring some of the incarcerated home. There was 3 laws that I mentioned, and this was in 2020, 2021. This was around 2019. It was right before COVID that we started to have these dialogues. And I said there are 3 laws that we can change to bring the homies home, meaning those that are incarcerated. 1, the juvenile. They were sentencing black men who had committed crimes when they were 16, 17, 18, and they would charge them as an adult. And so if we could raise, that's what I tell them, if we can raise the sentencing law, then that will give an opportunity for a lot of brothers who caught their cases when they was 17, 18, 19, and many of them, like the brother that raised the question, was sitting there doing a natural life bid without the possibility of parole. But through advocacy around educating people about the problem of mass incarceration, people began to look at the studies that showed that the frontal cortex of the brain does not fully develop until a person is 24, 25 years old. So it's unjust to sentence someone to life without the possibility of parole who committed a crime when they were a juvenile, because their brain has not fully developed. That's the science. And so through activism, that law was changed, and they now have raised the age of juvenile all the way up to, I think, 20 or 21 now. So the very brother that asked that question, he's actually coming up for parole now, where he was sitting in jail thinking that he was never going to get out. He was sitting on a natural life bid. But now, because of activism and legislation that changed, he has an opportunity to come out. That was one law that has changed and has given a lot of brothers, there's many brothers that are out now because that changed. The other law was that we're still working on is the law around the joint venture. And the joint venture is where if someone committed a homicide and there was maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 who were there with you when the crime was committed, and y'all run together and flee, and they catch and they find out that there was 5 of y'all there, but only one person either stabbed the person or shot the person. Under joint venture, all 5 of you going to jail for life. And so again, these are the type of things we got to educate our young people about. You got to be careful who you hang with, because there's a lot of people serving life bids in jail and they didn't kill no one. They were just with someone who killed someone. And so that law, is unfair in many instances, especially when it's not applied fairly, because when it's young black boys, they're going to lock everybody up. But I've seen cases where there was a party in South Boston, here in Boston, that was the white part of town, and the group of white boys got drunk and they beat this other white boy up. They beat him to death. It was 5 of them, but they didn't all get life sentences. Only the main one, and he got, I think, like maybe a 2nd degree manslaughter charge. Some of the other ones got lesser crime. So it's not, these laws are not applied equally. And so again, there's a lot of brothers. So by changing these laws, right, we can begin to deconstruct the system of mass incarceration. So I know I'm saying a lot, but I think that the work through the Ministry of Justice, and again, this work is not just the work that should happen and needs to happen exclusively in the mosque. The minister wants us to take leadership over our people. The Million Man March wasn't just for the brothers and sisters in the nation. We didn't do that by ourselves. We formed the local organizing committees, which caused us to bring other organizations together, bring the churches together, the NAA, all the organizations. Everybody got to get down on this work together. And so that's how we was successful with the Million Man March. And so with these ministries, it can't just be something that's exclusively for us in-house in the mosque. There's a component of it that can be applied inside the mosque, but there's a component of it that has to be applied externally, so that we can organize our people, whether they're in the nation, in the church, in the organizations. They don't have to be, it doesn't even have to be religious based. We can come together around the issue of justice or the issue of education or the issue of art and culture. See, each one of these ministries are things that our people are engaged in that the enemy has actually weaponized against us. He created systems, but now we can recreate our own systems so that they can be agents of healing. And just like I talked about a lot here, the impact that hip hop has had on my life, but the negative influence that it's having now, well, that's because we don't control it. But if we had a strong ministry of art and culture, then we can start to produce artists that promote music that will put the seed, a positive seed, in today's young people, and we can begin to change the narrative.
All praises due to Allah. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. But before we go to announcements, I want to ask you if you have any closing comments, anything else you want to leave with our audience.
All praises due to Allah. I just want to say that it was an honor to be on this show. I want to encourage all of you that here. I'm really happy to see that all of the hosts were young people in the Nation of Islam. And man, that's inspiring. I want to celebrate and congratulate you and encourage you to stay the course because we need, more of our young people to be a part of the Nation of Islam and this work. And so I want to say to Minister Abdul Salam, I thank you for bringing me to Baltimore. I think that was like 9 years ago, and so I want to bring you to Boston. I look forward to bringing you into Boston, and I look forward to coming back to Baltimore. I thank you for having me on the show. And to your listening audience, just stay the course. If you've never been to a mosque, a Nation of Islam mosque, make your way to the nearest Muhammad mosque near you, because I'm telling you, there's a life-giving, life-saving teaching that we need in our life. So thank you for having me on. That's all I want to say. All praises are due to Allah for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
All praises due to Allah, and we thank Allah for them indeed. Yes, sir. And with that, we're actually going to go ahead to our announcements portion. So, family, we want to invite you all to study with the Nation of Islam, to learn the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad as taught to us by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So, for our study group, you can go to NOI.org/go study. To join the Nation of Islam, begin the process to get registered. You go to NOI.org/join. If you want to give us a call for any questions, any locations you need to know, you can call us at 773-324-6000. Once again, that's 773-324-6000. Next, we have a platform where you can listen to lectures and music pieces by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan 24/7, and that is Final Call Radio. So you can actually go on finalcall.com and click the listen live button, or we have an app that you can download on iOS and Android devices to listen every day of the week, every time. And next, family, this is our Final Call newspaper with our latest edition. So you can always get a copy of your Final Call newspaper from brothers out there on the streets. And if you may not see any in your area, you can go to thefinalcall.com, and there will be articles there for you to read, the latest articles of every passing week. And also you can sign up for a digital subscription, and it'll come straight to your email, I believe. So the latest copies of the Final Call newspaper will be available on all of your devices for you to enjoy. Next, our host, Brother Donald Muhammad, has a book, and that is I Never Knew I Am All That. Now, this is a children's book, and it has some wonderful illustrations by our sister Amina Lay out there on the West Coast. So I suggest you grab this book for your grandchildren, your children, or even if you just want to, go back and see the wonderful book that our host, Brother Donald, has put together. So this is available on Amazon.com. And once again, that is I Never Knew I Am All That. Yep, Amazon. For our guests who may be in the Richmond, Virginia area, you can come every Sunday to hear the reality of God delivered by student minister Tracy Muhammad at 801 Prince Hall Drive, Richmond, Virginia. And that is the Hobson Lodge. So every Sunday at 11 a.m., you will hear the reality of God, which are our teachings delivered by student minister Tracy Muhammad, who's our local representative in the area. Next, if you're down here in the Baltimore area, you can come down to 2801 North Bucklin Street. That's where we're currently meeting. And you'll hear from our dear brother, Abdul Salam Muhammad, or a local student minister who may be speaking that Sunday. And it's the same time at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time each Sunday. So once again, that's 2801 North Bucklin Street. Same teachings, just delivered by different ministers, of course. All right, family. And with that, I believe we will close out in prayer since we won't have our Eat Well, Be Well segment tonight. So I believe we will close out in prayer at this time. Attention prayer. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Rahman Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladina an'amta alayhim. Ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum.
This house is dedicated to knowledge and to the spreading of knowledge. Elijah Muhammad inspired new thought, new mind, new way of civilization among black people. But he wanted a house from which a light could be lifted up to give guidance to all who would be guided as this world begins to close down. This National Center for the Re-Education and Retraining of the black man and woman, but for the totality of the human family of our planet. I named this mosque after the only woman that the Quran names a chapter after, the mother of Jesus, Maryam. All human beings need to be re-educated. That is the purpose of the National Center.